We are ready to start. We are on 38. We are 3 lines up from the wide lines. Mesiv Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Where we just ended, that when we started the perek, when we started the chapter started with telling us that a stolen lulav is not valid to be used on Yom Tiv. And the first man to Amar, who was Rabbi Yechon Mishum Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Rabbi Yechon Mishum bar Yochai said that because the mitzvah haba ba'aveira, it's you cannot fulfill a mitzvah. You can't. Hashem's not going to accept your mitzvah if you go ahead and you fulfill it by doing an aveira. So therefore, even all 7 days, even though the rest of the 7 days are rabbinic, still one cannot accomplish the mitzvah of sukkah of lulav with a stolen lulav because it went via an avera. It's like, I don't know, it's like someone's in court being accused of stealing a car, I don't know, and he just drives up with the judge's stolen car, and that's how he arrives to court. Now, that's not going to work, right? It basically, it's pretty unacceptable. Okay, now, then where we ended off yesterday was Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani stated that was only on Yom Tov Rishon. That was only on the first day of Yom Tiv. But the rest of the Yom Tiv, it's not a problem. And you could use a stolen lulav, because it's no different than a borrowed one. He does not learn the problem is a mitzvah haba ba'aveira. He holds the problem is that the Torah says lechem, the lulav and esrog has to be yours. If you stole it, it's not yours. But the rest of Yom Tiv, there's no such, it's rabbinic, and there's no such reason, there's no such need. Now, Mesiv Nachman bar Yitzchak, that's roughly 3 lines up from the white lines. So, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak asked, lulav hagazol yavish pasuk. Our Mishnah, the Mishnah states, a lulav which is stolen or dried out is going to be pasuk, invalid. Hashal kosher, but you could figure out from there, it infers that if it's borrowed, it's not a problem. Stolen is a problem. But now I would assume we could have just said we should have said borrowed. It should have written borrowed, or maybe if it said borrowed, we could figure out even stolen, because definitely stolen is on a lower level than borrowed, right? Stolen, you get the avera, and it's not yours. At least by borrowing, it's just not yours. So if the Mishnah would have just wrote in borrowing, we would have known stolen. In fact, the Mishnah wrote stolen must be that borrowed is permitted. Emas, so how's that so? If this case is on Yom Tov Rishon, haksiv lechem, mishalchem, v'hav lav didehu. Now, it can't be the first day of Yom Tov. It can't be that we're saying that a stolen lulav is not permitted on the first day of Yom Tov, but a borrowed one is permitted, because everyone agrees that on the first day of Yom Tov, it has to be 100% owned by you, and when you borrow something, you don't own it. Elav b'yom tov sheni, v'ktani gadol pasol. So it must be that it's going on Yom Tov sheni. It's going on the rest of the days of Yom Tiv. And our Mishnah says a stolen lulav is you can't fulfill your obligation with a stolen lulav. So our Mishnah is talking about the second day of Yom Tiv, or the third, fourth, fifth, not the first. So therefore, how could Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani, that we finished off yesterday, be stating that on Yom Tov Rish that the Mishnah is only going on the first day of Yom Tiv, but the rest of the days is permitted. But the rest of the days, it's not. The rest of the days, but we just proved that the Mishnah cannot be talking about the first day, because otherwise borrowed would also be a problem. So the kasha on Yeshua Chamneim that says the Mishnah is only going on the first day of Yom Tiv, we seem to have a proof that the Mishnah is going on all days of Yom Tiv. So Ulailam b'Yom Tiv Rishon. Really, the Mishnah is going on the first day of Yom Tiv. Let me buy Amar. But you can't ask that question, because this is what the Mishnah is trying to say. Don't say the following. Lo yibai shol d'lav didehu. For sure, stolen, for sure, borrowed is going to be a problem on the first day of Yom Tiv. That the Mishnah doesn't even say, because it's obvious. It's not yours. A borrowed item is not yours, and it's never going to be yours because the owner expects to get it back. Therefore, you can never could be yours in order to qualify lachem. Lachem means yours. The Torah says you have to take yours. Abel gazel, guzzle, but a stolen one, ema stam gazela yush bailemhu. Perhaps we would say, but if you steal it, even on the first day of Yom Tiv, it's going to work. Why? Because on the first day of Yom Tiv, at least when it comes to borrowed, it's never going to be yours. But when it's stolen, the owner at some point, or perhaps immediately, will give up. You say, listen, it's a palm branch. I don't care too much for it. It's worth 10 cents. Unfortunately, it's worth a lot more than that, but it should be only worth 10 cents. And and whatever, I'll go in my backyard and I'll pick another one, and therefore he gives up on it. Then the robber acquires it because the owner gave up on it. Once he gives up on it, the owner acquires it. So even though I'm standing on the first day of Yom Tov with a stolen lulav, it is mine because halachically I acquired it due to the fact that the owner gave up on it. So therefore, I have crossed off the checklist of lachem. Terry says it has to be yours. It is mine. After I got it through stealing, but it is still mine, as opposed to that's what I might think. So an interesting flip of the situation ends up being that a borrowed lulav is worse, technically, could be worse than a stolen lulav on the first day of Yom Tov. A borrowed lulav is not yours. The owner never gave it to you to own. You just borrowed it, so you don't have ownership of it. You haven't checked off lachem, which means you have to own it on the first day of Yom Tov. A stolen one, as bad as it is, but still it's at least lachem. So therefore, the Mishnah started off saying, borrowed for sure bad. It's not yours. You can't acquire it, and you have to have an acquired lulav on the first day of Yom Tov. Stolen, I might think that it's okay because at the end of the day, I acquired it because the owner gave up. And that the Gemara finishes off. No, that's why the Mishnah says a stolen lulav specifically. So even though we had a good question on the one that held that the Mishnah is going on has to be on the all days of Yom Tov, because we were trying to infer from here that a borrowed one is not going to work, and everyone understands a borrowed one is not going to work on the first day of Yom Tov. So now we're saying no. The fact is that a borrowed one, everyone agrees is not going to work on the first day of Yom Tov. A stolen one is where the question arises. The Mishnah was telling us a stolen one does not work on the first day of Yom Tov, and that's the answer for Yitzchak Bar Nachmani that claims the Mishnah is only going on the first day of Yom Tov. Okay. Now, once you're talking about the fact that you have to own it, all four species that you have to own on the first day of Yom Tov, we're going to go into what about Hadassim and a bit of a story. We are 3 lines up of the wide lines, or rather 3 lines from the bottom of the Amud, 3 lines on the bottom of the page. Last word on the line is Amar. Okay. Amar luhu Rav Huna lahanahu avantri. That Rava told the following to the Jewish merchants that sold the 4 species, and they were the ones who sold in the shuk. They had a store, they had a storefront, and they bought it wholesale. So he was telling these merchants as follows: Kizavnisu asa me'akum. When you purchase the hadassim from an idol worshiper, loy tigzuzu oisan. Don't cut them yourself. Don't go into the front office and say, I'm here to buy, 100 bundles of hadassim, and then you go to the back and start cutting it. Rather, you should have ella legazu inohu. Let the workers and let the people who own the idol worshippers who own it cut it themselves. V'yavulechu, and then they'll bring it to you. Why? My time up. What's the reason why Rav Huna was telling the merchants that they shouldn't be the ones cutting the hadassim? Rather, they should have the supplier cut it and then sell it to them. Stam oidecham gazlani artaninu. That a stam, our assumption is that the default is that the idol worshippers stole the land. And we're turning to the top of 30b, Lamed Amid Aleph. The karka einin exelis. Now, the halacha is that land can never be stolen, meaning that so land can never be stolen. If it can never be stolen, we'll come back to this and explain in a minute. But if land can never be stolen, then there's no giving up on it, right? So on a object like a lulav, which is movable, so when we said yesterday, if it gets stolen, you could acquire. If I steal a lulav and the owner gives up, I acquired the lulav. Okay, that makes sense. But land that halachically can never be stolen, then you can never acquire it, because even if the owner gives up on it, it doesn't make a difference. The owner can't give up on. You can't give up on land. Land is not something which you could just give up. It's always there. It can't get stolen. It can't get lost. The reason people give up is because they don't plan on ever getting it back. A piece of land you can get back. You know exactly where it is. You just go there and bring it to court. So a piece of land can never get stolen. If it never gets stolen, then that means that even if I steal it, and I would halachically try to take possession of it, it's not going to work. So hilkach lagzuinu. Therefore, they should cut it. Then when they cut the hadassim, so then they ended up being the ones that stole it. So meaning even if they placed themselves down on a plot of land and opened up opened their tent and said, "We're selling hadassim," it doesn't mean that the land is stolen. And what would happen if I would go ahead, if the Jewish merchants would go to the back of the store, back in the background, and start cutting the hadassim, they would be the ones who end up stealing. Because when they cut it and they pick up the hadas, that is the item that can now get stolen because it's no longer attached to the ground. So they're the ones that stole it, and then the owners give up, and then they end up acquiring it in their hands. So that is going to be a problem because we need the stealing and the changer and the changing of ownership by picking it up. That has to be done by two separate people. So the point is, what has to be is that the idol worshippers are the ones to cut it. They are the ones to officially steal it. They the ones that stole it because when they cut it, they picked up the hadas that which is movable. So they're the robbers. And when they hand it over to you in the front, to the Jewish merchant in the front, now you acquired it via shinarishos, which is the changing over of property, the changing over of hands, and now you halachically acquired it, and now you could go sell it, and when you sell it, it'll fall into the category of lechem, of you. Yeah?
Well, you're talking about a situation here where no one realizes theft is taking place. No one here in this transaction sees it that way, understands it in that fashion. It's I guess it's ignorance of the law, I guess.
It's ignorance of the law. Now, first of all, it's at stam, right? The assumption is that an idol worshipper is on by default on stolen land. We don't know. We don't know for a fact. It's our default position. So, if that's true, and it ends up being stolen land, it'll end up being that if you cut it yourself, you're the one that stole it, and acquiring it will be a problem because you have to hand it over to someone else. You need shina rishus. You need a change of property, change of hands, in order to actually have the acquiring take place. Now, okay, now at the end of the day, but the Gemara asks a question. Saif, at the end of the day, if the merchants themselves end up cutting the hadassim, then what will end up happening is that what is the issue? That will have, when they cut it, the owners of the land are going to give up on their hadassim that are now movable. And it will end up happening that the changing of rishus, the changing of property, the changing of hands will take place when the merchant sells it to the actual whoever's buying it from them, right? So technically, the merchants could go to the back. The process would be the merchants go to the back, they cut it themselves. They are the ones who are by default are going to end up being the ones who are stealing it, and they can't acquire it yet. When they go to the shuk and sell it, when they hand it over to the buyer who's going to use it in shul, since the original owners of the land already gave up on their hadassim, and you have now a change of hands between the one who cut it originally, the merchant, and the store owner, the merchant, and the one who's buying it to go shake it in shul. At that point, the one who shook it in shul is going to acquire it legally, so it shouldn't be a problem. So what was Rav Huna telling them? And that answer was, you're right, it is true. But we're talking about what about the ones that the merchants take themselves to shul? Merchants end up taking, if they cut the ones that they're actually themselves going to end up taking to shul to shake, there will be no shinarishos. There's going to be no change of property, and therefore they're never going to be able to acquire it. Okay.
Like if third party in the chain, they acquired it through a fence, as they say in the language of the pawnbroker world.
Second. Now, it happened. There's a bit of a change, if you notice, because originally, when we started off, and yesterday, we kept talking about if you have a stolen lulav, and if the owner gives up on it, you acquire it. So what happened to the changing of hands? According to Rafuna,
But you're not the one.
no, but according
The guy gave up on it, but you're not the one who stole it.
well, you are the one that
Your
stole it.
possession.
No. So originally, yesterday we were talking about a lulav. The order of events was that I stole it, the owner gives up on it, and now I acquire it without change of hands, without shinu rishos, so change of property. So apparently there's a bit of machlekes. According to Rafuna, he holds that in order to acquire stolen objects, number one, the owner has to give up on it.
Yeah.
And number two, we need to change of property. That's to change hands from the original one, that's from the one that stole originally, to someone else. I guess a third party at this point, right? So there is a machlekes. Rashi points out, Rafuna holds you need Yush, the owner giving up, and you need Shina Rishas. Okay. Now, we're going to go further. We're on 5 lines up. First line is Liknu. Liknu bishinoi maisa kasavar. Lulav ein tzarech agud. That was a question. Liknu bishinoi maisa. Let him acquire it with a change of when you do something to the actual physical structure what you just bought. Meaning, there's another way to end up to acquire it. Either you hand it over to someone else, or you actually take possession of it. If I steal something and I want it, and the owner gives up on it, so till now we were saying, according to Rafuna, you have to actually hand it over to someone else, and he acquires it. You can acquire it. However, there's another way for the actual Goslin, the robber himself, to acquire it if he does a physical change to the item. So when I take it and I bind it together, the hadasim with the aravis and the lulav, that's enough to say there's a physical change to the item. You showed ownership over it by actually doing something physically to it. And that should be enough to acquire it. So when the merchants cut it themselves, if they were cutting from a stolen land, or by default it was a stolen land, they could cut it themselves. And they could actually use it and show themselves. And the way they acquire it is with shinoi maisa, a change of action, by binding it. So then so when Rafuna told them they should have the idol worshippers cut it, there's no need for it. Let them cut it themselves. They'll bind it, and that act of binding will show dominance over this item and will give you the rights for ownership halachically. On that we say, Kasavar lulav ein tzarech agud. He held that a lulav never had to be bound. Therefore, you're never going to bind it. You're never going to show any bias ownership over it. Therefore, that's not a good way around it. Because according to him, he didn't. There's no binding. Now, if you tell me lulav tzarech agud, lulav tzarech igud shinoi hachayzel briyasahu, shinoi hachayzel briyasai lo yishmei shinoi. Now, another answer is, what you could do is that it's not a real change. When we say when you have to do a change to the object in order to acquire it, it's a type of a change that's unretractable. You can't change it. And in this case, when you bind it, you're not showing a high sense of ownership over it, because you can unbind it and it'll be back to original state. So you're not really showing that you really have much bias and ownership and control over it, because you didn't do a huge act on it. That's another answer to say that it wouldn't work. Okay. Now, maybe a third way to acquire something which you stole. So far we learned if you stole something, you can acquire it. If you hand it over to someone else, of course, it's with the owners giving up. So you steal something, the owners give up. When you hand it over to someone else, there's a change of ownership, and the second person acquires it. Or alternatively, you could actually do a physical change to the item, and that will show ownership. Or the third way is bishunei Hashem. If you do something to it, and it's going to change the name of the item. Now, how do you change the name of the item? In the beginning, it was just called a simple hadas. Hashta Haishana. But now it's called a Haishana. And Shana Rabbah, when you take, we call them Haishanis. So you did something to it that changed its name, and by changing its name, it shows value to it. You show ownership over it, and therefore you could acquire it. And just Mikara, we just turned to the top of 31a, Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph. Mikara Nami La'asa Haishana Karule. It's not an answer, because Hadassim were also called Haishanas. The names were always interchangeable. Therefore, there's you by taking it for the Haishana Rabbah, it shows no significant change to the actual item. So we're left off with we have no Shinu and Maisa. The binding's not good enough. We have no Shinu Hashem because it was always the same name. Therefore, we're left with the last one. Is that the first one is Shinu Rishus? The only way to actually acquire a stolen adas is by handing it over to someone else. Okay, Tanurabanim. Now that we're speaking about stolen items, we never spoke about a stolen sukkah, right? In the beginning of the Mishnah, it says lulav ha'gaizel. Vayavish says a stolen lulav. What about a stolen sukkah? That's what we're going to discuss now. Sukkah gezula, v'masachech b'shus harabim. If you steal my sukkah, also if someone puts chach in the public property, now that is also stealing. You're stealing land from everyone, in fact, because you have no permission to go ahead and settle down on public property. Because it's not right. Now, if you open a storefront on public property, perhaps that's permissible because that's what public property is made for. But to settle down and live on, that's not what public property is made for. Rabbi Lazar Paisel, Rabbi says that it's invalid, you're not fulfilling mitzvah, and the rabbi said it's kosher. Why? What? A stolen sukkah?
Yeah. Why is
We'll see. We'll see in a minute. Good point. But that we'll see. Now, Amar Rav Nachman. So that's the brisa. A stolen sukkah, or you place on public property. Rabbi Elazar says you have not fulfilled your mitzvah. The rabbis say you have fulfilled your mitzvah. Amar Rav Nachman. Machlekes b'shetoikif es chaver v'yitzir misukasei. The machlekes between what does it mean by a stolen sukkah? It means, according to Rav Nachman, is that you actually walk into someone's property, you physically pick them up, you chuck them out the sukkah, and you settle down and you squat in the sukkah. That's what we're talking about. Rabbi Lazar l'tamei. So now, you're not really stealing the beams, you're not really stealing the schach, you're stealing the property. That's what we're talking about. Rabbi Lazar l'tamei, and Rabbi Lazar, according to his reasoning, the Amar, ein adam yotze yidei chavasei b'sukkasei shel chaverei. The reason is that someone is not, I think this was on, this was 27b, we mentioned this already, that one cannot go ahead and fulfill the obligation of sukkah with the sukkah of his friend. So therefore, that is called, it's an invalid sukkah based on the rule itself that you cannot fulfill, not because it's stolen. That's not the problem. The problem is because one cannot fulfill the obligation with a sukkah of your friend. Now, ikarken exalas, sukkah gezulihi. Now, if it's a stolen ikarken exalas, which can't be, right? If you steal the land, and we learned previously the land can't be stolen. If you steal the land, sukkah gezulasi, then it's the stolen sukkah. Binami or karka ein exala sukkah shu'ulihi. And the reason is that if you can't steal land, right? So if you can't steal land, it's a borrowed sukkah at best. So therefore, and it's not yours, and it has to be yours on sukkahs. Now, even though we never heard that drasha before, we always hear when it has to be yours. We always learn that's referring to the lulav and the esrog and the das and the rava. We never learned that this sukkah has to be yours, right? If you go to your, none of us ever heard of halacha that if you don't have a sukkah and you use your friend's sukkah, you have not fulfilled the obligation, right? You can use any sukkah. So Rabbi Lazar, Rashi explains, Rabbi Lazar, he himself, which we don't go with, but he himself darshans, he learns, it says, Tasa lecha, says you should make for yourself, mishalcha. So he darshans, he learns from there, and first thing there, it has to be from yours. And it can't be stolen, and it can't be borrowed. So therefore, this machlekes between Rabbi Lazar and the rabbis is that we're not talking about you stole the beams of the sukkah, you stole the schach, is that you stole the ground, the property. And according to Rabbi Lazar, that's not going to work because it has to be yours. And you'll never be yours because you can never steal land. So you're never going to have the giving up of the owners for you to acquire it because owners never give up on land. And also, you physically cannot steal it in order for it to eventually become yours, even when they do give up, if they ever give up. Rabbanan l'tameh, and the rabbis hold that number one, they hold that you could accomplish and fulfill the obligation of sukkah with the sukkah of your friend. The karka ein exalis, and also land is not land, and land can't be stolen anyway. So you could accomplish the sukkah with the sukkah of your friend, and you never have a mitzvah baba aveira. You never run into problems of a stolen sukkah because you can't steal property. So what is the problem with? I mean, of course, it's a not nice thing to do, right? Don't go into Eric Lehman's house and kick him out of the sukkah and squat, but for other reasons also. But there's no halachic issue because it's not a nice thing. You're not a nice guy. But at the end of the day, you didn't steal, and there's no issue that has to be yours. So there's halachically, you have accomplished the mitzvah, even though you're a terrible person. Now, the sukkah shu'ali, and therefore the rabbis finish off. It's equal to a borrowed sukkah. Now, that's the machlekes. The machlekes really is if the sukkah has to be yours or not. According to Rabbi Boruch, the sukkah has to be yours, and it's not yours because you can never steal it. Well, therefore, by default, it's never yours. Therefore, you can't accomplish the mitzvah because the Torah says it has to be yours. According to the rabbis, is that there's no issue. It doesn't have to be yours. So it's no worse than a borrowed sukkah. Therefore, one could go in and if one throws out his friend from sukkah and squats there, it works. Now, aval gezel etzem v'sikach. But if you go ahead and you steal the wood and the actual schach, behem tivrakol ein loy elo demei eitzim. According to everyone, then all you owe is the money, the monetary value of the wood, and you have fulfilled the actual you have fulfilled the mitzvah of sukkah because you own the schach, right? So everyone agrees that if I just steal the beams, then I have accomplished my mitzvah because I only owe them the monetary value of it, and even though again it's not a good thing to do, however, you have fulfilled your obligation because everyone agrees, we'll see in a few minutes, that you don't have to return it, and you have acquired it. And we'll explain in a few minutes why that works that way. And everyone agrees that if you stole the beams, you have accomplished the mitzvah. Okay, so the Homacheks and Rabbi Lazar and the rabbis was only about the actual property, not the physical sukkah itself. Now, Mimai, how does Rav Nachman, who just said all this is the Homacheks is only if it's yours or not, if on the property. How did he know that? How did he learn all this? How did he figure it out? Because in the brisa, if you look in the second line on top of the staff, in the brisa, it says sukkah, a stolen sukkah, and the schach, if you stole it, or it's in the shusarabim. Now, the public domain, shusarabim, karka lavdidehu, just like in the public domain, right? It's not your property. It can never be your property. Sukkanami lav karki didehu. The cases we're talking about that it's not your sukkah. So, what he figured out from the Mishnah that the brisa rather was equating a stolen sukkah with public property. Just like public property, you can never just like public property, the issue is going to be it's never yours. The case of the stolen sukkah was that the property was never yours, and that's how Rav Nachman learned out. That was machlekes between the rabbis and Rabbi Lazar. Okay, now we're going to go into a story concerning stealing beams for a sukkah. So, Ahi Safta, there's that old woman or a grandmother or a babi, the Asila Kamid Rav Nachman. She came in front of Nachman. Amralei, and she was complaining, she was coming to Rav Nachman with a complaint. Amralei, Reish Gelusa v'chlo Rabbanam Bei Reish Gelusa b'sukkah Gezula Naviyasvi. The Reish Gelusa, who was the head of the Jews in exile in Babel, and all the rabbis who are sitting in a sukkah, they are sitting in a stolen sukkah. Meaning what happened was that the servants of the Reish Gelusa, the servants of the prince, the head of the exile, the servants went ahead and stole her wood to build the sukkah. So she comes to Rav Nachman saying, all the rabbis and the Reish Gelusa himself are sitting in a stolen sukkah, because unknown to them, it was stolen by the servants of the Reish Gelusa. So now, Tzavchan, she was screaming. She didn't pay attention to them. Rav Nachman just ignored them. So Amalei, so he told the students who were wondering why didn't. Amalei. So the woman said back to him, "Isasa dahavi lelavua tlas meyavet tamani sari avdi." Could be it was the students. The students asked him, "I don't understand. There's a woman here whose grandfather was extremely wealthy and powerful. He had Meya v'tamani sari avdi. He had 318 servants. And she's screaming in front of you, and you're not going to do anything about her." Now, as Rashi explains, this person, his grandfather of hers was Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu says that he had 318 servants. So the point is saying that there's someone screaming, there's someone who's a child, a daughter of Ram, and you're not doing anything about it. So Amruluhu, so you respond to the students. What could I do? She's a screamer. And there's nothing halachically I can do about it, because if they stole the sukkah, they are sitting in a kosher sukkah. Now she's saying that they're sitting in an invalid sukkah, and she wants her beams back. The halakha is that if someone steals something for a house, so technically, biblically, the owner of the beams could go and you build a mansion with it, all built on that one beam. Right? That one beam is supporting $1 million house. The owner of the beam that was stolen from could technically, according to biblically, could demand that beam back. So you have to take down the entire house and give the beam back. However, there's something called takanas. There's a special takana, takanas hashavin, that in order to, now no one's going to give it back, right? No one's going to, they'll end up continuing fighting forever. So in order to make it easier for people to return things, the halacha is that if you use it to build a building with, if you use wood and beams that you stole to use a building with, you don't have to give back the actual beams. You have to give back the worth of the beams. It'll just make it easier in court to close up the court case, right? Because if you tell a guy he has to dismantle his entire palace that he built, now, so although it's not fair, you shouldn't have stolen it. It seems to be right. This is never going to happen. It's going to go back and forth. It's never going to take place, and no one's going to get anything. Therefore, the rabbi said, okay, just return the money, and that's much easier to deal with. So therefore, over here, if they stole it and they built a sukkah with it, that decree kicks in, and she cannot claim rights to the wood itself. She can't claim rights to the sukkah, but they owe her the money. So it doesn't look like she was screaming that she wants the money. She was screaming she wants the wood, and what could he do? There's nothing halachically. There's nothing he could do in Bezdin. Rather, it's all they owe is the money. Okay. Now, Amar Ravina. So Ravina said, "Hi, kishua de matlasa de gezula." That beam of a stolen sukkah. Avili Rabbana kanta misham takanas marish. There's the takana. This is what we just said. There's a takana that you don't have to return it. Rather, you just have to pay back the money. Pshita maishna me'itzim. So, like we're saying is so that's Ravina. Ravina came into the Beis Medrash. He said, "People, students, I have a halacha for you. A great thought that came to my mind. When the rabbi said you don't have to return stolen beams that was built in a house, that includes a sukkah." So I'm asked Pshita, of course, that's obvious. What is your big novel idea that you're coming to teach us today? So now the same, I might think, Eitzim shchichi, aval hai lo shchichi. I might think that that regular wood is normal to be found. So if someone steals regular wood, small pieces of wood, especially like for schach, that's not a problem, because that is normally found. It'll be yush. And anyway, the owners give up. And maybe the rabbi made this decree only when the owner actually gives up, then they owe the money. But big, large beams are hard to find, especially back then they didn't have mills. It was very hard to get a hold of a large beam that could actually hold up things properly. That's not shchichi. There's no yush. If there's no yush, perhaps then, hold on. Right. Okay. Fine. So the way I say the story is a little wrong, because when Ravina came into the, he said this halacha. When they said chita, they're just asking him, "What are you coming to add on?" We already learned. We said before that if you steal wood and you use chach on top of it, you only get the money. Right. That was the previous story. That's what Rav Nachman said. Hold on. Yeah. So Ravina. So they asked Ravina, "What are you coming to add on to words of Rav Nachman?" Rav Nachman said the story with the woman screaming. Rav Nachman said that all you have is the worth of the wood. Ravina comes and says he comes to the Beis Medrash and says a big halacha. The beams, the same halacha applies to the beams. So we ask back, what's the difference between the wood of the story of the woman screaming that they stole her wood for the schach, and you saying a large beam? What's the difference? So again, the answer is that I might think that large beams that they're not normally found. So the owner never gave up on it, and therefore the decree never applied. This decree that you only return the money when you use it to build a house. And therefore, Ravina came to tell you that no, it even applies in the case of the big beams. Now, Hani Mili Begoy Shiva. Now, this halacha Ravina, that the beams, you don't have to return them, rather you have to return the monetary value of the beams. That's all 7 days, because all 7 days the sukkah is called a house. We called it our house, we go out and we live in it. Therefore, if you use the beams to build a sukkah during the 7 days, you don't have to return the beams. But after 7, this house turns into just a small hut. So we're not going to say that anyone put much money into building a hut. It's not like they built a palace with these beams. They built a simple hut. That we would demand that it's not called a house. It's called a small, hut in your backyard. So after the 7 days, at that point, the Bezin will say you have to return the stolen wood because you no longer have that decree of the rabbis that was only talking about a house which you live in and not a hut. Now, however, if you build your sukkah with cement and you really make it a strong structure, at that point, if it's a real structure, then you have to return the money. So what we're left with is if someone usually steals wood, beams, or whatever, steals some material to go build a house, the halacha is the rabbis decreed that you don't have to dismantle the house. Rather, you have to go ahead and return. The money, the money of the beams. When it comes to a sukkah, if you do that for a sukkah, all 7 days you don't have to return the beams. You have to return the monetary value because it's called a house. But after 7 days, after it's no longer useful, it's no longer a house that you live in. It's just a hut. There's no reason really for that decree. No one's going to put up such a fuss about dismantling their sukkah. Therefore, you have to return. After 7 days, you'll have to return it. If you make it a solidified structure with cement, then at that point it's very hard to remove, and again, it's going to get dragged in the courts. Therefore, we will say you do have to return it. Any questions? Okay. Now, oh wait, I just saw something. I just saw John Penn, like in the movie Shugim.
What?
No, John wrote something. It must be going back with the binding. I'm not sure. We'll talk about it afterwards. Okay.
Well, it's a stolen sukkah that they're living in, right?
I don't know.
You don't know the movie?
No.
Which movie?
Shugim.
Okay.
Never heard of that one.
You gotta watch it.
Wow. What is that, like one of... It's an Israeli movie?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Now we're going to the halacha of a dried out lulav, right? Because that was the second thing we said. We said a lulav yavish. A dried out lulav is pasul. Tana. Yavish, pasul. A dried out lulav is going to be pasul. Rabbi Yehuda machshir. But that is a Tanakama. Those are the rabbis. Rabbi Yehuda says it's kosher. A dried out lulav is kosher. So Amar Rava, machlekes lulav derabanan savri. Because the machlekes between the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda. Now Yehuda says you could use a dried out one, and the rabbis say you cannot use a dried out one. That is only talking about a lulav of the Rabbanon, which I assume means to say is not the first day. The first day is lulav daraisa, it's a biblical mitzvah. The second day is third, fourth, and fifth. That is a rabbinic. Now then you can use it. Makshina lulav le'esrig, and because we're comparing a lulav to an esrig. Ma esrig boy hadar, afula boy hadar. Now, sorry, I told you read that wrong. Let me go to that. Let me go back again. Tana yavish pasul Rabbi Yehuda machshir. We learned that a dried out lulav is invalid. Rabbi Yehuda said it's kosher. Okay, so the rabbis say that lulav is invalid, and Rabbi Yehuda says a dried out lulav is invalid. Rabbi Yehuda holds a dried out lulav is permitted. Amarav machlekes lulav bilulav machlekes in the lulav. The Rabbanan sabi machin lulav esrog. The rabbis say that, which is the first opinion that says that's invalid. They say that we compare a lulav to an esrog, ma esrog boy hadar. Just like the Torah says, an esrog has to be beautiful. Afula boy hadar. The lulav also has to be beautiful, and a dried out lulav, everyone will agree, is not beautiful. Now, Rabbi Yehuda holds, loy makshina lulav le'esrog. We don't compare a lulav to an esrog. Esrog has to be beautiful, but not a lulav. Therefore, a dried out lulav is not a problem. But everyone agrees when it comes to an esrog, it has to be beautiful, and dried out is not going to work. Now, lulav like boy Rabbi Yehuda hadar. Is it really true that Rabbi Yehuda holds that a lulav doesn't have to be beautiful? But we learned Rabbi Yehuda Amar Ya'agdu milamala, that you have to go ahead and bind it. We learned this previously, that a lulav has to be bounded, right? You're supposed to even bind it towards the top.
If it's dried out, it would be more difficult to bind.
No, so we'll see in a minute.
Also, I say the issue of whether or not the lulav is beautiful or what have you, but probably agree. You at least don't want it to be ugly.
Right, but still, no, a lulav's a lulav. Even if it started out, it's a lulav. It has the name of a lulav. That's what we're trying to say. It will be permitted. According to Rabbi Yehuda. Now, is it true Rabbi Yehuda holds that a lulav doesn't have to be beautiful? But we learned Rabbi Yehuda holds you have to bind it from the top. My time misham debayi hadar. Why do you have to bind it? Because binding it adds beauty to it. We'll let you know. This is the reason. Rabbi Yehuda amar mishum tarfin kafos tamarim, that the Torah says a bunches of palms. Kafos bound. That he played. It says kapos tamarim. Sorry, not kafos. Kapos tamarim. It says a bundle of palms. We play a bundle of palm branches. Branches of a palm branch. Okay, I'm sorry. Kapos tamarim. Branches of a palm tree. And it would play on words is kafos, means bound. However, if they're like spread out, then if they're extremely spread out, then it's not going to work, and you have to actually bind them back together. So it's not the reason why we bind them according to Talmud is not because of beauty. Lulav doesn't have to be beautiful, therefore it could be dried out. The reason you have to bind them is that because he learns based on the pasuk that they have to actually be closed up, and if they're spread out, you got to end up closing them up. Okay, we're gonna stop here because there's no good place, because next is it's gonna go straight into a question. So we're gonna end up tomorrow. We'll continue going on this point, and we're going to ask according to Rabbi Yehuda, is it true that a lulav does not have to be beautiful? All right, everyone have a great day.